What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, we're going to go through some of your current drafts, how you've set the team up, what the formations are looking like, which player picks are popular as well, and obviously I'll give you my opinion on whether I think there's anything that could be changed, what some of the advantages and disadvantages are to the squad you've picked. Every single squad we go through as well is going to get a Rate My Team score from Fantasy Football Scout, who have sponsored today's video. If you haven't already signed up to be a premium member, there is a very handy link in the description below. You can just click on that and get signed up as a yearly or a monthly paying member. And one of the tools, and there is a lot in here, I've talked about them before, there's all these tools on the sidebar that you can see, is the Rate My Team tool. Now, once the season starts, you'll be able to auto-populate this from your FPL ID, but in pre-season, you can just build it. So that's what I've done. This is the draft that I put out just a couple of days ago on the channel, and it's got me a score, if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, of 365.32 over the first 6 game weeks. And as you see the scores from the other teams in this video, that's not that bad. But one of the ways you can use this tool is if you're not sure about a player. So for example, Neto is in my team right now. A lot of people don't fancy him that much. You can click him off and get rid of him, and you can put in a different 4.5 instead. So for example, we'll put in Gordon from Everton, and you'll see the score goes down ever so slightly, 362.02. Now 3 points might not sound like a lot, but over the course of a season, if you're getting that much difference every 6 game weeks, it can build up. So that would kind of tell me that maybe Neto is actually a better option than Gordon. Again, you don't have to make every single pick using the Rate My Team tool, but it is kind of handy if you're not sure and to give you an idea of how you're looking. So if you want to sign up to use that tool, all the other ones that Fantasy Football Scout have got, hit that link in the description below. So before we get into the drafts themselves, I thought we'd take a little bit of a look at the data I collected from some of the teams that were sent to me. So I went through 100 teams, which I know is a small sample size in the grand scheme of things, right? There's a lot more FPL managers that are signed up on the site, but at least these people that have sent them to me are active. Some of the teams that's on the FPL site might still be auto-pick teams. So one of the things I looked through was formations. Do they have 3 at the back, 4 at the back, or 5 at the back? And 3 at the back is kind of dead, right? We said that early on. I did think a lot of people would stick to kind of 4 and 5 at the back just because of the way the player prices are done. And I'm not completely discounting 3 at the back. There's lots of reasons why you might want to go for it. And I'm not completely ruling it out for myself. But I am personally on a 4 at the back formation. And that was definitely the most popular, followed up with 5 at the back and then 3 at the back, where there was only a handful of people that are currently going for that. Things could change. We might do one more of these videos before the Game Week 1 deadline just to see if things shift around a little bit. Another thing I looked at was goalkeeper choice. So 4.5 million goalkeepers, still very popular, more popular than the 5 and the 5.5 million options. Although I think if we'd done this in seasons gone past, the gap between 4.5 and the more expensive would have been even bigger. So I do think there has been some shift, but not enough to knock the 4.5 million goalkeepers off their perch. And essentially, I think when people tinker around and they get closer to the deadline and they're trying to put a bit more money in attack, they're trying to upgrade a few players, I do think some of those 5 and 5.5 million goalkeepers will get downgraded. The interesting thing, and I didn't count every single different goalkeeper, but from what I saw, pretty much all the 5.5s were Ederson. There was only one Lloris, I think. I don't think I saw any Alissons. With the 5 million goalkeepers, there wasn't many Mendy's in there. A lot of it was Ramsdale or Sarr, and then the 4.5s was kind of a mix between Meslier and Raya and Sanchez mostly as well for the goalkeepers. And then I did player popularity, so I included Trent and Jesus just to see how popular they were. Only 3 teams out of the 100 did not have Trent in the team. 91% had Jesus. He's currently, at least again from the sample size that I've seen and on the FPL site, more popular than Salah, which is kind of crazy. And then in terms of the premium attacker player pick, Salah's the most popular, which I don't think comes as a surprise. The biggest thing I found with this is Kane is selected by quite a few more people than Haaland. Whereas if you look on the FPL site, Haaland's like still over 60% ownership. We'll have to wait and see what happens in the Community Shield. And Kane is quite a bit lower. But in terms of the active managers that sent their teams to me, Kane was higher. I think it was about 60% compared to about 30% for Haaland. Son, then the next popular, like right at the bottom, and De Bruyne even less so. But I think that's to be expected. So it'd be interesting to see what that shift is between Kane and Haaland and Son before Game Week 1. A lot will depend on the Community Shield. A lot will depend on the final pre-season games. But that is the big difference I saw from the information I collected versus the FPL site, that Kane is ahead of Haaland. Maybe if I'd gone through 200 teams, 300 teams, might be a bit different. But I do think active managers are a little bit worried about Haaland's minutes. So first up is the 5-2-3 formation, which you don't see that often. There's probably a lot of people watching that don't even realise you can go for 5-2-3 in FPL. It still scores very highly on the Rate My Team tool, 365.83. One of the reasons is for all those defenders that are in this squad. So Trent, Robertson, Cancelo, Diaz and Reece James. Lots of potential for defensive returns, lots of potential for attacking returns as well. And from all the conversations we've had, we know that, you know, not just over the season, maybe over the first 4 to 6 weeks, there's a very good chance that they will match or even outscore the midfielders and forwards at the same price point. Now, it's not necessarily a fair comparison, because you can get much cheaper defenders at like 4.5 and 5 that will also outscore the midfielders and forwards. But in terms of consistency, as long as these 5 play, you're not really going to be using your bench all that much anyway. And I'd much rather have most of those defenders than I would a similarly priced attacker instead. So I do think 5 at the back, if you're kind of, I don't want to say brave enough to go for it, because I think quite a few people are on it. But if you're happy enough and, you know, you don't mind the maybe slightly, you know, less flexible structure that you can have, it should be pretty good for points. And to be fair, in this draft, you still have those 2 premiums in Salah and Haaland. So if you want to shift to Son, De Bruyne or Kane, you can still do that. And if it gets to the point where maybe you only want 1 premium, maybe it is another year where we just captain Salah every week, you can downgrade Haaland and spread that money around a little bit. The one player in here that I want to talk about was Mitrovic. I think Haaland versus Kane we're going to do a lot more before the Game Week 1 deadline, and I've spoken about Neto quite a lot, so I'm not going to keep going over old ground. I quite like Mitrovic as a pick. If we just have a quick look at the fixtures for Fulham. So Liverpool at home is not great opening day. Who knows? Maybe Fulham gets something. I'm sure they lose the game. Maybe they get a goal. If they do, it could be Mitrovic. Wolves away and Brentford at home isn't that bad. And maybe just because it's at home, Brighton at home is not too bad either. I do worry that if this is kind of a bit of a longer term pick, then having to play Chelsea, Spurs, Arsenal and Liverpool in the opening 7 is not great. But for 6.5 million, he's at least a solid pick. In this draft, you can't get in another defender anyway. And if you went for a midfielder instead, maybe someone like a Rashford or Martinelli, there are slight risks there. They're not necessarily completely nailed on. They're not necessarily going to get you good minutes every single game. Neither of them are on penalties either, we don't think. Maybe Martinelli will get them at Arsenal. So although Mitrovic isn't that exciting because of the fixtures, he's at least a solid pick. So I don't actually mind it too much. I guess it is slightly, this formation is slightly less flexible because there isn't that other slightly more expensive midfielder in there. I don't think that every draft has to have an £8 million midfielder in, for example, but if you wanted to get one in, you'd have to find 3.5 million from somewhere. And if you're not going to downgrade like a Salah or a Haaland, we're then into multiple transfers. So I think this kind of draft with 5 at the back has a lot of potential for good points early on. And obviously, if it goes wrong like any other draft, you can use your wild card. But if you go for it, you have to be sure you're in FPL manager that can stick with it if things start to go slightly wrong, because getting up to one of those slightly more expensive midfielders might be a little bit more difficult with this draft. I think personally, if I was going 5 at the back, I'd probably go 5-3-2, because I think there are a few more options in midfield that I'd like versus attack. But ultimately, I can't really say there's anything wrong with Haaland, Jesus or Mitrovic. So overall, I quite like it, and so does the Rate My Team tool. So next up is a 4-5-1 draft with 3 premium attackers. So Kevin De Bruyne, Mo Salah and Harry Kane are all in this team. Now the idea of this video is not to kind of talk people out of going for the draft that they want to, right? It's supposed to be fun. If you like your draft, you should absolutely go for it and just see what happens. But I'm going to talk through why I don't like the 3 premium players setup and the way this one is set up in particular. And also the Rate My Team tool doesn't like it either, right? It's 334. The first team was 365. That's a big drop. Over 30 points over 6 game weeks is pretty huge. And most of that kind of comes down to value. So we talk about value all the time. We want the most valuable players. We want the best points per million spent. So that's why players like Trent Alexander-Arnold are in the team, because we know there's a good chance they're going to score another 200 points this season. And in attack, you often have to pay £10 million plus for that. He's a valuable player. We've all got Neto because we're hoping he can score like a 6.5 or a £7 million midfielder, etc., etc. Then you get to the likes of De Bruyne, Salah and Kane. Now, they're so expensive because they're consistent point scorers, and their value to us is not necessarily points per million. The value is in captaincy, but you can only captain one of these players every week. A lot of people will have 2 premium attackers in their team so they can rotate. So you might go Salah game week 1, then Haaland game week 2, Salah game week 3, whatever way it is, right? Same with De Bruyne and Kane if you wanted to, and leave out Salah. But that third one then is taking up a lot of your budget, which is hurting other areas of your team, and you're not getting the value out of them because you're not captaining them. And I would say that most people do not need 3 premiums. The problem with this is you need them to be scoring very, very highly every single week, and that is just not going to happen, right? It's very unlikely that De Bruyne, Salah and Kane are going to hit double digits every week, and as soon as they don't, you will lose ground to other teams. So just as an example, right, let's say you wanted to keep Salah and Kane. Kevin De Bruyne is 12 million. So you change him to an £8 million midfielder, suddenly you've got an extra 4 million to spend. So instead of playing Andreas Pereira every week, who, by the way, might be an absolute gem of a player, but for most of us, he's in the team to sit on the bench, right? Maybe he takes loads of set pieces and he's super attacking for Fulham. I don't know. I've got, you know, I'm a little bit cautious about whether that's going to happen, basically. But you swap De Bruyne down to an 8 million, maybe Mason Mount. Then you've got 4 million to upgrade Andreas Pereira. Suddenly you've got 2 £8 million midfielders. And I would guess that, you know, Mount and Diaz will outscore De Bruyne and Andreas Pereira. And that's where the issue comes with having 3 premium attackers. You just have to make too many downgrades elsewhere. Even if you wanted to kind of bench Andreas Pereira, you could still do the same. De Bruyne down to Luis Diaz, and then upgrade one of your forwards to Gabriel Jesus instead. And I'm not trying to sit here making everyone's teams the same, but that is kind of the thought process I would go through with a 3 premium player setup. And again, you could downgrade one of your premiums and upgrade the defence instead, like Fabian Schär or Henderson if you wanted to. There's loads of different ways you can do it, and I would kind of assume or hope that most of those ways will get you more points over the first 5 to 6 weeks. Just a quick note on a couple of players, right? So Schär, I think he's going to start alongside Botman, but I'm not 100% sure. When I had a look at his minutes, they weren't quite as high in pre-season as some of the other centre-backs. I'm going to assume it's going to be a 4 at the back with Botman +1. So Schär's minutes might not be quite assured. Newcastle fans, let me know in the comments below if I've got that completely wrong. And then Henderson in goal. In days gone past, or seasons gone past, we would have looked at, you know, newly promoted side keepers, and obviously Henderson's gone from Man United over. But I think these days, because you can get so many other cheap goalkeepers, you can get Sanchez at Brighton, Raya at Brentford, even maybe Meslier at Leeds might be better. I'm just not sure I would go there. I'm not saying you need to pump more money into that position, but I would just think about whether Henderson is the best option. So overall, it's not a bad setup. You've got lots of quality players in there, but I think you'll get a better points total overall if you drop one of those premiums. So this is a classic 3-4-3 formation. Pretty good score on Rate My Team, 352. One of the benefits to 3-4-3 is your bench, right? You can have a full playing bench, apart from the goalkeeper in this case. So Tomiyasu, Andreas, and Nico Williams. I'll come back to Tomiyasu in a minute. The other thing is, obviously, Nico Williams is 4 million. And outside of goalkeepers, the only way to get a £4 million playing player is in defence. So you can put that extra money elsewhere. I do think this season, though, with how valuable kind of 4 and 5 at the back formations are, I don't think the bench kind of outweighs that. I think you're better off trying to get those points by having another defender in there rather than having a full playing bench. Just on specific players, with Tomiyasu, I'm not sure he's going to start the season. I think he's still not played any pre-season minutes yet. Given that he had an injury for a lot of the end of last season, now he's got one in pre-season, I don't think he's going to necessarily be rushed back either. And I think we have seen Ben White play right back and Saliba and Gabriel in the middle. If you're only going to spend 4.5 million, I would just ignore Arsenal. I think there's too many question marks over who will be the starting centre-backs when everyone's fit. I would probably just go to someone like Lewis Dunk. I know it's not that exciting, but he's a fairly solid pick who should be nailed for Brighton. Brighton's defence is fairly decent. He's got a bit of goal threat as well. And if you don't have to play him in game week 1 against Man United, then you've always got him off the bench when you need him in later weeks. So that's what I would do there. With Havertz, look, Tuchel's been talking a lot about Chelsea and often in a negative light during pre-season. I do think that a lot of that has been about the attack rather than the defence, especially in the final third. So not necessarily the attackers, but how they've been playing in the final third. So that it could include their wing-backs as well, for example. And I don't think that it massively puts me off Chelsea. And I don't think it means that Havertz is going to get less minutes, but I do think there's £8 million midfielders that are better. Even Mason Mount, I think, is probably a slightly better option than Havertz. Then you've got Luis Diaz as well, Saka too. I think I prefer all of them over Havertz. So that's just a personal preference. I don't think Havertz is bad. I just think for 8 million, there's probably slightly better options. I would also question having Bailey and Martinelli. So I had Martinelli in my last draft. He's still in there, I think. There are slight worries about his minutes. Nketiah has played on the left, I think, in pre-season. Smith Rowe, when he's fit, can also play there. I do think Martinelli is probably first choice for that spot. And so if you want to risk it, right, because his output for 6 million could be really good, especially with Arsenal's kind of opening 4 to 5 fixtures, I think it's fine to have him in there. I don't know if I'd also want Leon Bailey as well, who I also think is a little bit of a risk. And also for 5 million, like, where do you go if he becomes an issue? There's no real other midfielders for 5 million or less that you could bring in. So you'd have to upgrade, so you'd have to make another move elsewhere. And I would just want to try and limit the amount of those types of players I have. And also, I'm standing by this. I do think for Villa, from an attacking point of view, it's only really the first 2 fixtures that are good. And then it gets pretty bad. And I think if Leon Bailey doesn't perform in the Premier League, Gerrard will hook him and he'll play someone else instead because he's got so many options. So I've kind of gone off him at this point. And I just think that if you shave a bit of money off somewhere, I don't know, maybe you go Edison down to a 5 or 4.5 maybe, Leon Bailey up to like a 5.5 or 6, like Ruben Diaz, for example. I think that is a better option at 4-3-3 than having this particular 3-4-3. Even if you stuck to the £5 million defenders, you know, someone like, if you wanted to go like a Gabriel and Zinchenko and change Tomiyasu to a different team, I think they are probably better options than Leon. They're safer options, I would say, than Leon Bailey. You know they're likely to play. I don't know if we can be that confident with Leon Bailey. I know a lot of Villa fans are, and maybe I've got it wrong, and I think that game against Bournemouth in game week 1 could be nice. I just worry about how long he'll keep his place for. But let's see in the last pre-season game what happens. Maybe I'll change my mind. I lied. I said I wasn't going to talk about Neto, but I'm going to, because we've had some news since I did the last, my own personal draft, which is Jimenez is out for about 8 weeks, so he's going to miss the start of the season. Now, I don't think that's necessarily a great thing for Wolves. I know it's going to put the minutes up of maybe Neto and Podence and maybe Hwang if he's fit as well. Their minutes should go up because Jimenez won't be there to play, so they're going to have to play someone else. But those players are all quite different to how Jimenez is. I think he does a lot of work in that number 9 position. He's also quite big. Like Neto and Podence are small players. It doesn't mean that they can't do well, right? Height is not necessarily the only thing that matters, but it's just going to be a different way of playing for Wolves. And they've had Jimenez throughout pre-season. So Podence has played as a number 9, I think, during pre-season already. So he might go and play there. Does that make him a much better option? I'm not so sure. So minutes-wise, it could be a good thing. Overall attacking play, I think it kind of maybe hurts them a little bit. Does it put me off going for Neto? Probably not, because there's not a huge amount of other 5.5 million options that I like. But it might make me consider whether or not I can upgrade him, whether or not I can just change him to a defender instead. So I still think I'll line up with him on my Game Week 1 squad. But I think the Jimenez thing is potentially bad news, not good news. Not necessarily by a huge amount, but I certainly don't think it's a good thing for Wolves. Okay, so this is a 4-4-2, but with a difference. This is a bench boost team, okay? So in Game Week 1, the bench boost will be active. Meslier is obviously 4.5 million keeper. You've got Tony, who's 7 million, Kulusevski, who's 8 million, and Dallo, who's 4.5 million as well. Now, there are some minutes risks in this team, possibly, but for Game Week 1, they should be okay. I think if Grealish does well in the Community Shield, he'll probably start Game Week 1, although you never know with Pep, of course. Martial might be an issue if Ronaldo stays, but again, I don't think Ronaldo's had enough pre-season minutes, even if he stays, to start in Game Week 1 anyway, so I think Martial will get the nod. And then Kulusevski, similar. Even if Richarlison's going to be an issue for him, Richarlison's suspended in Game Week 1. So as a bench boost team, it looks pretty good. And to be fair, over the first 6 weeks, the Rate My Team score is 348. So considering there's no Salah, no Kane, you know, no De Bruyne, Son, Haaland, etc., it still scores pretty well. Now, obviously, there's some downsides straight away. You don't have those premium players. I think in this particular team, they were going to captain Luis Diaz. Not necessarily a bad option, but a lot of people are going to captain Son, Kane and Salah, and if they go big, you could be behind straight away with your bench boost, potentially wasted, depending on how it goes. So I'm not going to talk any more about particular players. I want to talk specifically about whether I like bench boost in game week 1. Now, it might surprise you. I don't completely hate it. I think a lot of people play the bench boost wrong. In my opinion, it has to be played very, very soon after you wildcard or after you have unlimited transfers. So you've got unlimited transfers in game week 1. You've got 2 wildcards throughout the season and unlimited transfers for the World Cup. Potentially, if things fell right, you could build up to the bench boost and then wildcard out of it later on. But things have really got to go right. And again, you're then using transfers for players on your bench that are not usually going to be in your first 11. So if you're going to use it in any of the early game weeks, I kind of like game week 1. People will say we don't know what to expect. We don't know what these players are like. But you're sitting here telling me that you don't think Reece James and Trent and Cancelo and Mount and Diaz and Saka are not going to be good. They should be fine, right? We know what they're all about. We know what their teams are like. And there's a lot of players in this team from kind of the top 6 anyway. And players like Tony and Meslier and Raya are kind of nailed on anyway. So I don't completely hate it. The one negative really is you've got an expensive bench. And then to get back to a premium takes a lot of transfers. So if you wanted to upgrade Mason Mount to Salah, for example, that's going to cost you 5 million. To get 5 million out of this team, you've probably got to make another 2 transfers. So if you weren't going to do that, and this person might be looking to do this, you might be forced into an early wildcard, so a game week 2 wildcard. Not necessarily the end of the world this year. I think in previous seasons, using your wildcard in game week 2, then having to wait until like game week 18 or 19 till you get your second wildcard, and possibly it then being even better to hold on to that till like game week 30. That's a big gap without using a wildcard. But this year, a lot of people are going to use it between kind of game week 5 and 9. So you're not using it that much earlier. So I do think it's a little bit more viable this year than in previous seasons. The other thing I would say, and I kind of touched on this when people play it incorrectly, is people get so worked up about using it. They change all their plans just to make sure their bench boost is good. If you've used it in game week 1, and hopefully you've done well out of it, like Kulusevski against Southampton, Tony and Dalot, they could all do fairly well. You only need, like, what, 16 to 20 points, maybe slightly higher off your bench boost. If you get it nailed straight away, for the rest of the season, you're only ever planning what your first 11 is going to be looking like. And that can be super handy, especially around double game week. So it's hard to know how the rest of us are going to play it and whether it is going to be better to wait. I don't think I would ever use it in game week 1, but I'm not completely against it. And I don't think a game week 2 wildcard is necessarily as bad as it would be in previous seasons. But again, I will probably use mine a little bit later than that. So there we go. Hopefully you enjoyed that one. If you did, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button as well. I know I can't get through everyone's teams. There was a crazy amount sent to me, but thank you very much for submitting them. And I might do another one next week before the game week 1 deadline as well. Let me know what your thoughts are on what I've said, the teams that we've seen. Are you kind of 4 at the back, 5 at the back? Is there any room for 3 at the back formations to start from game week 1? And would you ever dare go for a game week 1 bench boost? Let me know below if you're thinking about that. Otherwise, I'll leave it there and I'll be back tomorrow with another video.